The city lights shone brightly that night, but Richard Knight hardly noticed them. He was sitting inside his black luxury car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Richard was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country, known for his power, sharp mind, and cold heart. People feared him. People respected him. But very few people truly knew him. That night, he was angry. A deal had fallen apart at the last moment, and Richard could not stand losing. His phone kept buzzing with calls from his assistants, but he ignored them. He pressed harder on the accelerator, his car speeding through the wet streets. Rain poured heavily, hitting the windshield like 1,000 needles. "Move!" he shouted at the cars in front of him, frustration burning in his chest. Richard had lived his whole life with control. Everything in his business, his empire, was under his command. But that night, something was different. Something felt off. The more he tried to control his path, the more the world seemed to push back against him. The rain grew heavier. The road glistened dangerously. Yet, Richard didn't slow down. He was too lost in his thoughts, too lost in his pride. He thought money and power could protect him from everything. Then, it happened. A sudden flash of headlights blinded him. A truck swerved across the road. Richard tried to turn the wheel, but the car slid across the slippery street. In one terrifying moment, his luxury car spun out of control. The sound of screeching tires mixed with the roar of thunder. Glass shattered, metal bent, and the world around him turned upside down. The powerful businessman, the man who once thought nothing could break him, was now trapped inside a broken machine. Smoke filled the air. Richard's chest burned with pain as he tried to move, but the seat belt cut into him, and his legs felt heavy. Blood trickled down his forehead. His vision blurred. He coughed, gasping for breath. "Help," he whispered weakly, though he knew no one was around. The road was empty, the storm loud. For the first time in years, Richard felt small. He felt powerless. Darkness started to close in around him. His mind drifted. Was this it? Was this how his story ended? Alone, broken, in the middle of a cold, wet night? But just as he felt himself slipping away, he heard something. Footsteps. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But then, a voice, soft yet firm, cut through the storm. "Hold on. I'm here." Richard blinked, trying to focus. Through the shattered glass of his window, he saw a shadow. A figure running towards him in the rain. The door was jammed. The stranger pulled at it with all their strength, the sound of bending metal echoing in the storm. Finally, with one powerful tug, the door gave way. Cold air rushed in. Richard felt a pair of hands on him. Gentle, yet strong. The stranger carefully unbuckled his seatbelt, speaking calmly even as the storm raged on. "You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Richard's chest tightened. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. Most people spoke to him with fear, or with greed. But this voice carried something different, something warm. The stranger pulled him out, supporting his weight against their shoulder. Richard winced in pain, but he could feel the determination in the stranger's grip. Step by step, they dragged him away from the wreckage, away from the smoke and broken glass. Richard's head rested against their shoulder as his strength faded. His eyes fluttered shut, but not before he caught a glimpse of the stranger's face. It was blurry, but something about it felt familiar. A face from somewhere deep in his past. "Why," he managed to whisper, his voice weak. "Why are you helping me?" But before he could hear an answer, darkness took him completely. The rain poured harder, lightning split the sky, and the once mighty businessman lay unconscious in the arms of a stranger. A stranger who, against all odds, had appeared at the very moment his life was hanging by a thread. Little did Richard know, this was not just an accident. This night was not the end of his story, it was only the beginning. The person who had saved him carried more than kindness in their heart. They carried a truth powerful enough to break him all over again. And when Richard finally woke up, that truth would leave him speechless. The sound of machines beeped steadily in the hospital room. White walls surrounded Richard as he slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he felt was pain. His body ached, his head throbbed, and his chest felt heavy. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The last thing he remembered was the crash, the headlights, the storm, the spinning car. And then, a voice. Hands pulling him from the wreckage. His eyes fluttered again. He wasn't dreaming. He was alive. Richard tried to sit up, but his body refused to move. He groaned, frustrated. The man who once stood above thousands of employees, commanding with power and pride, now lay weak and helpless in a hospital bed. Then, he noticed something. Beside him, sitting quietly on a chair, was someone. The figure was leaning forward, hands folded, eyes watching him closely. Not a nurse. Not a doctor. But the same shadow he had seen before everything went dark. Richard's lips parted. His voice was hoarse. You? The stranger leaned closer. A woman. Her clothes were simple, a little wet from the rain, but her eyes carried a calm strength that startled him. You're awake, she said softly. Her voice was steady, warm, almost soothing. Richard stared at her, confused. He didn't recognize her, at least, not fully. Her face stirred something in his memory, but it was buried too deep. You pulled me out, he said weakly. She nodded. You would have died if I hadn't. Her words were plain, but there was no pride in them. Just truth. Richard studied her carefully. Her hands rested on her lap, still slightly bruised and red from forcing open the wrecked car door. They were not the hands of a wealthy woman. They were not soft, not decorated with diamonds or polished nails. These were the hands of someone who worked hard, who knew struggle. And yet, those very hands had saved him, the man who thought money could buy him safety. Richard swallowed hard. Why? He asked. Why would you help me? The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands, as if remembering the moment she had pulled him out. Then, her eyes returned to his. Because life is worth saving, she said simply. Her words hit him harder than any business deal ever had. Richard's heart twisted. All his life, people had done things for him because of money, because of what they could gain. No one ever did anything out of simple kindness. But this woman, she had risked her life in the storm for him, a stranger. Silence filled the room. Richard kept watching her, trying to understand her. There was something about her face, her presence. Something he couldn't place but couldn't ignore either. Finally, he broke the silence. Do I know you? The woman's eyes flickered. For a brief second, emotion crossed her face. But she quickly shook her head. No, we don't know each other. Her answer was too quick, too sharp. Richard frowned. His instincts as a businessman told him she was hiding something. But his body was too weak to argue, too broken to press for answers. The woman stood. You should rest. I'll let the doctor know you're awake. As she moved toward the door, Richard called out weakly, Wait. She stopped, turning slightly. What's your name? He asked. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes carried a sadness he couldn't understand. Anna, she said softly. My name is Anna. Then, she walked out, leaving Richard staring at the empty doorway. Anna. The name echoed in his mind, familiar yet distant, like a half-forgotten dream. Richard lay back against the pillow, his body aching but his thoughts restless. Who was she? Why had she saved him? And why did her name make his heart pound in a way he didn't expect? Outside the hospital room, Anna leaned against the wall, her hands trembling slightly. Saving him had not been part of her plan. Seeing him again after all these years had shaken her to the core. She whispered to herself, why did it have to be you, Richard? But she knew one thing, fate had brought them back together. And fate never moved without reason. Richard had survived the crash. But he had no idea the real storm was only just beginning. The rain had stopped by the time Richard opened his eyes again. Morning light filtered through the blinds of his hospital room. For a moment, he thought the night before had been nothing but a bad dream, the crash, the stranger, the pain. But then he shifted, and a sharp ache in his chest reminded him that it had all been real. Slowly, Richard turned his head. And there she was. Anna. She sat in the same chair by his bed, her posture straight but her expression unreadable. She didn't look like someone waiting for thanks. She looked like someone carrying a weight far heavier than his accident. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Richard just watched her, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. Her face stirred inside him. There was something about her eyes, something about the way she sat, calm yet guarded. Finally, Richard broke the silence. His voice was rough. "You stayed." Anna looked at him, her gaze steady. "You were unconscious all night. Someone had to make sure you lived." Her words were simple, but there was a quiet fire in them. Richard frowned. People didn't talk to him like that. Most people bowed, flattered, or begged. But this woman, she treated him like a man, not a millionaire. He studied her face again. And then, like a flicker of lightning, a memory flashed. A crowded street. A young woman smiling, holding a notebook close to her chest. A brief encounter years ago, long before he built his empire. His breath caught. "Anna," he whispered, the name tasting different on his lips this time. "Have we met before?" For a split second, Anna's composure cracked. Her hands tightened around the edge of the chair, and she looked away. "No," she said firmly, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. Richard didn't believe her. He had built his empire on reading people, knowing when they lied, when they hid the truth. And right now, every part of him told him Anna was hiding something. He leaned forward slightly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You risked your life for me. No one does that for a stranger. Tell me, why were you there? Why me?" Anna's eyes met his again. This time, there was no softness. Only a storm she had kept locked inside for years. "You think the world revolves around you, Richard," she said quietly, almost coldly. "You think people exist only to serve you or fear you. But not everyone who crosses your path is here for your benefit." Richard's chest tightened. No one had dared speak to him like that in years. And yet, instead of anger, he felt something else. Something like shame. Anna stood, ready to leave. But just as she reached the door, Richard's voice stopped her. "You remind me of someone," he said slowly, carefully. "Someone I should have remembered, but didn't. Someone I let go." Her hand froze on the doorknob. For a moment, her shoulders shook, as if she were fighting an invisible battle inside. Then, without turning, she whispered, "Maybe you should have held on tighter." And with that, she walked out, leaving Richard stunned. He sank back against the pillow, his mind racing. He was a man who had everything: money, power, respect. But now, lying broken in a hospital bed, he felt the weight of something he hadn't faced in years: regret. Outside, Anna leaned against the wall, her breath uneven. Seeing him again had pulled open wounds she had buried deep. She had told herself she was strong, that she no longer cared. But one look at him, one sound of his voice, and the past came rushing back. Memories of promises made. Memories of nights filled with laughter. Memories of being abandoned when she needed him most. Her eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. She had survived without Richard Knight. She didn't need him now. But fate clearly had other plans. As the hospital hallway filled with footsteps and chatter, Anna whispered to herself, "You don't even remember what you did, but I'll never forget." Back in his room, Richard closed his eyes, unaware of the truth standing just outside his door. A truth that would soon shatter everything he thought he knew about himself, his past, and the woman who had just saved his life. The shadows of yesterday were no longer buried. They had returned, wearing a face he could not ignore. And they were only getting closer. The hospital room was quieter that evening. Richard sat propped up against his pillows, his body still sore but his mind restless. He hadn't stopped thinking about Anna since she left. Her eyes. Her voice. Even the way she said his name. It was like she carried pieces of a past he had forgotten, or maybe ignored. The door opened slowly, and there she was again. Anna stepped inside carrying a tray with soup. She placed it on the table, her movements calm, careful. "You should eat," she said softly. Richard studied her face. He wanted to thank her, but the words didn't come easily. Gratitude was something he wasn't used to showing. Instead, he asked the question that had been burning inside him since morning. "Why did you save me?" Anna didn't look at him. She pulled a chair closer, sitting down quietly. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her fingers traced the edge of the table, her eyes distant, as though she was seeing something only she could remember. Finally, she spoke. Because I couldn't walk away. Not again. Richard frowned. Again. Anna's lips trembled. She had kept the truth buried for years, but now, face to face with the man who had once changed her life, it felt impossible to hold back. You don't remember me, do you? She asked softly. Richard's chest tightened. He searched her face, desperate to connect the dots. I feel like I should. But I can't. Anna let out a broken laugh, one filled with sadness. Of course you can't. You had too many people around you. Too much money. Too much power. People like me, we were easy to forget. Her words cut through him sharper than any blade. Richard had built an empire, but he had also built walls, walls that had shut out real connections, real people. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. Tell me, who were you? Anna's eyes filled with unshed tears. I was the girl who believed in you when no one else did. I was the one who stood by you when you had nothing. Before the suits. Before the cars. Before the empire. The room seemed to shrink around Richard. He remembered nights spent in small apartments, struggling with dreams bigger than his wallet. He remembered a kind face that used to encourage him, a hand that held his when he doubted himself. His throat tightened. Anna. Her eyes finally met his, and the pain in them was undeniable. You left me, Richard. You walked away without a word. And I had to carry the pieces of that choice for the rest of my life. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Richard's heart pounded. He had made ruthless choices in his climb to the top, but hearing her words, this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. I thought, he began, but his voice cracked. I thought letting go was better. I thought you deserved more than a man chasing impossible dreams. Anna shook her head slowly. No, Richard. You didn't let me go. You abandoned me when I needed you the most. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, her voice trembling with years of hidden pain. Do you know what it's like to be left with nothing? To wonder every day why the person you trusted most disappeared without a goodbye. Richard's chest ached. For the first time in years, he felt helpless, not from his broken body, but from guilt. He whispered, I'm sorry. But Anna laughed again, bitter this time. Sorry doesn't erase the past. Sorry doesn't fix the scars. Richard's hands clenched the blanket tightly. He wanted to reach out to her, to explain, to ask for another chance. But he knew the wound ran deeper than words could heal. And then Anna said something that shook him to the core. You're not the only one who paid a price, Richard. I carried more than pain after you left. I carried something you never even knew existed. His breath caught. What do you mean? Anna wiped her tears quickly, standing to leave. Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. You'll know soon enough. She walked out before he could stop her, leaving him stunned, his heart racing with fear and questions. Richard stared at the empty doorway, his mind spinning. What had she meant? What had she carried? The man who once controlled everything now found himself completely powerless, waiting for a truth that might destroy him. And deep down, Richard knew, the real crash hadn't happened on the road. It was happening now, in his heart. Richard could not sleep that night. Anna's words echoed in his mind over and over. I carried something you never even knew existed. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his hospital room, his heart pounding with questions. What had she meant? What was she hiding? For the first time in years, Richard Knight, the man who thought he knew everything, was drowning in uncertainty. When the door creaked open the next morning, Richard sat up quickly despite the pain. Anna stepped inside, carrying a small bag. Her face looked calmer than last night, but her eyes carried storms. He couldn't hold back any longer. Anna, he said firmly, what did you mean yesterday? What did you carry after I left? Anna set the bag down on the chair. For a moment, she didn't answer. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of anger and sadness, as though deciding whether he deserved the truth. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. When you walked away, you didn't just leave me with heartbreak, Richard. You left me with a life growing inside me. Richard's world froze. Her words slammed into him like another crash, harder than the one on the road. His breath caught, his chest tightening painfully. He stared at her, unable to speak. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed strong. I was pregnant, Richard. And you never knew. You never asked. You never came back. The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard's throat felt dry, his hands trembling against the bedsheet. 1,000 thoughts collided in his mind. Pregnant. A child. My child. Anna, he whispered, his voice breaking. Are you saying I have a... Yes. Her answer was sharp, leaving no room for doubt. You have a child. A child who has grown up without knowing their father. A child who learned to live without you. Richard's vision blurred with tears he didn't even realize had formed. He pressed his hand against his forehead, his chest heavy with guilt. Why didn't you tell me? Anna's voice rose, trembling with years of pain. Tell you? Richard, you left without a word. I searched for you, but you had vanished into your empire. I had nothing, no money, no support. I raised our child alone while you built your world of glass towers and power. Her words cut deep. Richard had faced countless rivals in business, but nothing had ever broken him like this moment. He looked up at her, his voice desperate. Where is the child now? Who are they? Anna's lips quivered. For a moment, she hesitated, as though protecting a fragile secret. Then, she whispered, her name is Grace. She's 6 years old. Richard's breath caught. 6. The number struck him like lightning. 6 years, the same time he had been building his empire, living in luxury, while his daughter had been growing up without him. He buried his face in his hands. Tears slipped between his fingers. For the first time in years, the mighty Richard Knight was not a businessman. He was just a broken man, crushed by regret. Anna's voice softened, though pain still lingered. Grace is kind, Richard. She laughs like I used to. She loves to draw. She deserves the world. And I will not let anyone hurt her, not even you. Richard lifted his head, his eyes wet but determined. Anna, please. I need to see her. I need to know her. Anna shook her head. You don't get to just walk in after 6 years. You don't get to appear in her life because fate saved yours. She doesn't know who you are. To her, I am everything. Her words tore at him, but he couldn't deny the truth. He had abandoned them, even if he hadn't known. He had lost years that no apology could bring back. But deep inside, Richard knew he couldn't turn away now. His voice cracked as he whispered, I may not deserve her forgiveness. I may not deserve yours. But she deserves the truth. And I will spend every day proving that I can be more than the man who left you behind. Anna looked at him, torn between anger and the faintest spark of hope. She wanted to protect Grace from pain, but she also knew Richard's words carried something real. Something different from the ruthless man she once knew. The room fell silent again, but this time, the silence was alive, with fear, with longing, with the weight of a future neither of them had planned. For Richard, the crash had destroyed his car, his pride, his illusion of control. But it had also uncovered something far greater, a hidden connection that bound him to Anna forever. And now, nothing would ever be the same. Days passed in the hospital, but for Richard, each hour felt heavier than the last. His body healed, but his heart remained restless. Anna's words haunted him, her name is Grace. She's 6 years old. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined a little girl he had never met. Did she look like him? Did she laugh like Anna? Did she even know he existed? One afternoon, the door opened quietly. Richard looked up, expecting another nurse. But this time, Anna stepped inside, and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a small girl, holding a sketchbook in her hands. Her hair was tied in 2 messy ponytails, and her big curious eyes scanned the room. Richard's breath caught in his throat. He didn't need Anna to tell him. He knew instantly, this was Grace. His daughter. The girl looked up at Anna and whispered, Mommy, is this the man? Anna nodded gently, her hand resting on Grace's shoulder. Yes, sweetheart. This is Richard. She hesitated, then added softly, he's your father. The word father hit Richard harder than anything else in his life. Grace tilted her head, studying him. My father. Her voice was innocent, filled with wonder and a touch of confusion. Richard's eyes brimmed with tears. He tried to smile, though his lips trembled. Yes, Grace. I'm your father. For a moment, silence filled the room. Richard feared she would turn away, that she would reject him. But instead, Grace took a small step forward. Are you the one from Mommy's stories? She asked. Anna's eyes widened. Richard looked at her, confused. Anna sighed. Sometimes, when she asked about her father, I told her stories. That he was brave, that he worked hard, that he loved her even if he wasn't there. Richard's heart broke. He had not deserved such kindness, yet Anna had protected his image for the sake of their child. Grace walked closer, her small fingers clutching the sketchbook. She held it out to him shyly. I drew this for you. Richard's hands shook as he took the book. Inside was a crayon drawing of a family, 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. 2 adults and 1 child between them. His vision blurred as tears spilled freely. It's beautiful, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you, Grace. The little girl smiled, her innocence shining through. Mommy said one day I would meet you. I waited. Richard couldn't stop himself anymore. He stretched out his arms. May I hug you? Grace hesitated, then looked at Anna. Anna gave a small nod. Slowly, Grace walked into Richard's arms. The moment he held her, his world shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. Her tiny arms wrapped around his neck, her heartbeat pressed against his chest. Richard sobbed openly, unashamed. Years of emptiness filled in a single moment. I'm so sorry, Grace. I'm sorry I wasn't there. But I promise, I'll never leave you again. Grace's small voice whispered in his ear, I forgive you, Daddy. Those words, so pure and gentle, broke him completely. Anna stood by the window, tears streaming silently down her face. She had carried the pain of raising Grace alone, but seeing this moment, even she couldn't deny the bond between father and daughter. Richard finally looked at Anna, still holding Grace in his arms. His voice was steady, filled with a new kind of strength. Anna, I can't change the past. But please, let me be part of her future. Let me be part of your lives. Anna's eyes searched his face, looking for sincerity. For the first time, she didn't see the cold businessman or the ambitious dreamer. She saw a father, broken but willing to heal. She wiped her tears and nodded slowly. We'll take it one step at a time, Richard. For Grace's sake. Richard closed his eyes, relief washing over him. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. But it was hope. As the sun dipped outside the window, casting golden light into the room, Richard realized something. The crash that nearly took his life had given him something far greater, a second chance. Not at wealth. Not at power. But at love, at family, at being the man he should have been all along. And this time, he silently vowed, he would never let go again.